Thanks everyone for joining us this morning. We will be speaking today about building and running an inclusion and diversity working group, giving some tips and just things we've learned along the way from our journey doing this within Netflix InfoSec. And my slides are not advancing. Sorry about that. Okay, so before we begin, I'll introduce all of us who will be talking today. So we have Anne, myself, and Sarah. Anne leads the Netflix Security Governance, Risk, Compliance, and Assurance program here on the InfoSec team. Sarah is a senior security engineer who's focused on our privacy systems and strategies. And I lead our user-focused security engineering team. So we're all part of the InfoSec organization here at Netflix. So in our time together today, we are going to talk about forming a group. Anne is going to deep dive into outlining your group's charter, creating a program, thinking about what you want to do if you would like to start a diversity and inclusion group within your group organization. I'm going to talk a little bit about membership, how we thought about building up our core group of members. And then Sarah is going to deep dive into a piece of our toolkit that we've gotten a lot of really great feedback about, hosting IND events, and then share some additional resources at the end. Then hopefully we'll have a little time at the end for some open Q&A. So before we dive into the content, let's start with a little icebreaker. So if everyone on the call can go to menti.com, here on the slide, menti.com, and enter this code 32622423. And I'm going to pop over to our poll. And the code is here as well, so it's not going to disappear. Here it comes back. Menti.com 32622423. All right, so before we get into it, we'll do just an icebreaker poll. Which superhero power would you like to have? So I see someone would like to be invisible. I think we only have read people's minds, ability to fly. Yes, flying would be amazing. Awesome. Okay, now that we're warmed up, we're all in Menti. In a word or two, describe what inclusion and diversity means to you. So this will create a word cloud for us. Equity, fairness, totally. Give folks just another minute or so. Safe, for sure. Welcome, invited, yeah. This is awesome. Empathy, valued. Invited, I like that. Equity, care. Great. So let's pop back over to our slides. So now I am going to send it over to Anne, who is going to talk about forming a group.
Thank you, Nicole, and hello, everyone. When you're forming an inclusion and diversity working group, the first thing to do is to figure out your why. This applies to both your group and yourself. What is the change that you want to see in your organization, in the world, in yourself? And why is that important to you? The answer to this question will drive everything about your group and your work, including how you design your program and ultimately what you work on. We intentionally called our group an inclusion and diversity working group because we are focused on inclusion first. You may wonder why that matters or what the difference is. Diversity may even feel like a necessary prerequisite. But to quote Vernee Myers, our VP of Inclusion Strategy at Netflix, diversity is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance. And you know, I've been at some of those parties and not been asked to dance or not to participate in the activities or be part of the conversation. And after a while, I kind of wondered why I was at that party. When I arrived on Netflix's information security team, the team was a mirror of the security industry in general, primarily made up of white men with extensive experience in the field. There were a small number of women and even fewer people of different races or sexual orientations. And we realized that before we really started hiring people from different demographic groups with different backgrounds and different life experiences, we had to create an environment on our team that was open to those differences and where everyone could thrive. Otherwise, when we did hire people, they might not join the conversation. We wouldn't benefit from everything they could offer, and they might not even choose to stay. We needed to change the water. What does that even mean? David Foster Wallace shared this anecdote in a commencement speech at Kenyon College back in 2005. So there are these two young fish swimming along, and they happen to meet an older fish swimming the other way, who nods to them and says, "Morning, girls, how's the water?" And the two young fish swim on for a bit, and then eventually one of them looks over at the other and goes, "What the heck is water?" The most obvious and important realities are the hardest to see and talk about. The water represents our default assumptions, our default way of operating. And the hardest thing about changing it is to even see it in the first place. We knew, and there's extensive research that supports the fact that diverse teams are stronger teams and produce better outcomes. We certainly wanted a diverse team, but we also knew that we first needed to create an environment where everyone could thrive. So once you've established your vision, it's time to design your program and figure out how you plan to accomplish your objectives and what your group will actually do. Let's just say there's a lot of opportunity and no right or wrong answer. It really depends on your team and your situation. I'm going to share what our program looks like just to provide an example of what I mean. So our vision is to make information security and our team an inclusive place for everyone. We've identified 4 kind of key strategic objectives. I'll talk about the first 2 here, and then Sarah will cover the toolkit a little bit later. So when we started our group, we had one person in it who happened to be a white man and who could have been any of us. He shared that while he believed wholeheartedly in this work, he also felt extremely uncomfortable with it. He wasn't sure how to begin, and he didn't want to make a mistake because he was afraid that if he said the wrong thing or did the wrong thing, no matter how well-intentioned he was, it could cost him his job. That's a very real fear, and that wasn't worth it to him. So he questioned whether he could even participate. But in order to grow and change, you have to be able to make mistakes. So one of the very first things to do at the top of our list was to create a safe space and psychological safety in particular on our team. Again, not just for him, but for everyone. And this is a work in progress. But in order to do this, we felt it was critical to really proactively build connections across the team and create opportunities for people to meet and interact with others outside their own team and the people they work with every day. We also wanted to really encourage people to share their experiences. So we developed, a few ways to do this. We have a quarterly newsletter, and we spotlight someone on the team with every issue to allow them to share their perspective. We also created a couple of Slack channels, one of which is a safe space to explore IND-related topics, and the other is a donut bot that pairs people on the team for, we call it, security time. It's an opportunity to connect with someone new or someone who you might work with but know relatively little about outside of work. And of course, it's been especially critical over this last year when we haven't had the same social opportunities that we used to have in the office. So in our next area of focus, we really wanted to build empathy and foster emotional intelligence. This work is hard. It requires looking at yourself, your own privilege, asking uncomfortable questions, and facing uncomfortable truths. I talked to my brother earlier this week. He's a white man, and he's feeling very defensive. He says he feels like white men are considered the root of all evil these days. And my brother isn't directly responsible for any of the inequities in our country, but he has benefited from significant systemic advantages throughout his life. It takes a lot of courage to be willing to see that and to accept your own privilege, as well as recognize the ways that you've benefited that others might not have. It's also not comfortable to change ingrained patterns. Just last week, I used the word lame in a Slack message, and this is a particular blind spot of mine. A colleague followed up and said, it's probably not the best word, especially since it might apply to somebody who is disabled or differently abled. What's worse, it didn't even register at the time. I responded to my colleague and said, did I use that recently? If so, thanks for flagging it. He linked me to my own post from within the hour. And it was a classic facepalm moment. I was frustrated with myself. It wasn't easy to get that feedback, and I'm sure it wasn't easy for him to give it. And kudos to him, he did give it, and he struck just the right tone. But many of us, myself included, would really struggle with how to draw someone's attention to something like that. So empathy is key, and so is emotional intelligence. We wanted to give people ways to engage with other perspectives and to better understand the impact of differences, and for all of us to be able to look at our own privileges and biases. We've done that through some of the different types of events and forums that Sarah will talk about later. We knew that if we could create that space and willingness to learn on the team, it would be a huge opportunity for us, because it's a lot different to hear about something in the news or in an abstract sense than it is to experience it yourself or to hear about an experience directly from someone you know and care about. Another reason it was important for us to focus on inclusion, and another thing to consider as you develop your focus, is because the members of our group had less direct influence on diversity. At Netflix, hiring managers are responsible for hiring. Nicole will talk more about who's in our working group, and we do have some hiring managers in the group, but not all of them. So the point I want to make here is that the people in our group are not and cannot be the only ones responsible for inclusion and diversity in information security at Netflix. Your group is also very unlikely to have responsibility for all aspects of the experience on your team. So it's important to understand what your group can do, what you can't, and where you'll need to work with others to accomplish your overall vision. You need to consider responsibility and accountability holistically. And when we start to think about responsibility and accountability, it also raises the question, how do we know that we're having an impact and making the progress that we hope to make? That's a really challenging question for a couple of reasons. First, even though it's theoretically possible to measure different dimensions of our team's demographic makeup quantitatively, in reality, it's much more complicated. Over the last 2 years, we've had multiple reorganizations. Teams have joined our group and left our group, and the organization itself has really changed. So it's hard to compare apples to apples when we look at the percentage of women or any other demographic group over time. That doesn't mean we don't do it. It just means that the numbers aren't always clear. The second reason that it's much harder to measure inclusion in any kind of quantitative is that it's hard to measure inclusion in any kind of quantitative way. It's more about the qualitative experience that people in our group have day to day. And how do you measure that? We've tried a couple of different approaches to better understand the experience. When we first kicked off our group, we used a survey to get some insight into our current state. And there were a number of challenges with that, including how to design the survey, how to interpret the results, and even how to follow up on some of the outcomes without really compromising anyone's anonymity. We haven't done another one since, but we might, and you might find that helpful also. More recently, we've developed a rubric. This is a long road. I don't know when we'll be done, or even if there is such a thing. But we wanted to give people a sense of what that journey looks like at different stages along the way. And so for individuals, this rubric describes a path to developing the competencies that people need to have with some suggested resources and concrete actions that everyone can take to make a difference. Everyone's path is unique, so it's definitely not a checklist or all-inclusive. It also offers a way to kind of assess our team's current state and some guidance on what that evolution looks like going forward. I can say that I'm proud of our team and how far we've come. I feel it when I look around at meetings and at who's in the room. I've been in the technology industry now for a while, and I've often been the only woman in a meeting or on the team or in the room. And I used to find myself counting subconsciously without even being aware that I was doing it, just looking around the room, counting the number of women, mentally calculating the ratio of women to men in just about every meeting I was in. And I just realized recently that I haven't done that for a while at work. I haven't felt the need to. We're not done, not by any means, but that sure feels different to me. And with that, I'll hand it over to Nicole to talk more about who's on our team and how we built it, which is another really important how.
Thanks. And really quick, before we move on, let's do another quick poll. Anne spoke about how we've thought about measuring success of our group and the value of it. So if you hop back into Menti, if you still have your tab open, how would you think about measuring the success of an I&D program? Let's see, I'm not sure. Oh, there we go. Here it comes through.
It's a tough question.
It is a tough question. Yeah, something we've talked about a lot. I don't think there's any clear answer, but like Anne alluded to, definitely helps when you look around the room and you see more representation. It does feel like you've made progress. I think maybe I biased that last one, or maybe somebody was just coming in at the last minute. Awesome. Let's hop back over to the slides and talk about group membership. So once you have a good idea of what you'd like to do with your group, how you might think about measuring its success, you also need to think about bringing other people along in your steering committee and your journey in your working group. So we think it's important to be intentional about choosing membership. A few things that we've considered when forming our core group. We think executive sponsorship is really helpful. So of course, it's absolutely not a prerequisite, but we think it sends a strong signal to an organization if you have buy-in from senior leadership and they're saying, hey, this is valuable to put on my calendar every other week or however often that your group meets to invest in this type of thing. And this might take a little bit of convincing. Maybe you could bring some data about the benefits that diverse and inclusive teams bring, having representation and diverse different ideas coming to the table, being more innovative. But hopefully it won't be a tough sell, and you can get someone on your team from leadership. Also, we think it's pretty foundational that whoever is on your group has a passion for I&D. They want to impact change. And that being said, we think that it's okay and it's important even to bring some beginners along in your journey, including people at different stages. So we've had some really great experiences of bringing people in who, thought I&D was important, but didn't really know where to start, didn't want to say the wrong thing, and after maybe being involved in the group for a year, we had one person who we thought of as a core member of our group and an amazing ally. And they reflected back on their journey to just joining the group and saying some things that they felt like at that point were pretty cringy. And, they had reflected back and seen how much they had grown. So really, we don't think it takes years of passion in the space or work in this space necessarily to have a big impact or be able to affect change, but just that passion for I&D and willingness to learn and grow. Also, we think it's important to represent different types of folks on your core group. So people with different backgrounds, that might be different genders, sexual orientations, ethnicities, also different levels of your organization. So Anne touched on this a bit as well. Maybe some managers, some individual contributors, some people from senior leadership, people from different parts of your organization. So really to try to get a good feel for all of the different voices, different opinions, and different perspectives that you can bring to the table, we think is super helpful. And, also I think we don't need to over index too much on getting all over or underrepresented groups at the table. While that's important to get those voices, we also don't want to overly burden people from underrepresented groups. So it's great to bring allies and champions along on the journey as well. And then, of course, it's helpful to just call out people who have the extra time to jump in and contribute. Because some of these things can take just a little bit extra time and legwork. And so with that, I will pass it over to Sarah, who is going to do a deep dive into some of the different tools we found in creating really great and impactful I&D events. And then close us out with some other tools that we find helpful and we've developed along the way as well. Take it away, Sarah.
Awesome. Thanks, Nicole. And thanks, Anne. It's great to be here. And it's really fun to be on this panel with Anne and Nicole. And the three of us have done some fun events together. And just being on the panel with you, Anne and Nicole, reminds me of how much fun it was to do those events. And hopefully will inspire some of you guys. It's great to be here at the Day of Security and to be presenting to all of you. It's always tough when we can't see and interact with all of you guys in the audience, and I'm sure it's tough for you guys as well. But hopefully you'll get a lot out of this and have some concrete tips and takeaways that you can use when you go back to your organizations. And we are also interested in learning from all of you, because I'm sure a lot of you have a lot of good experience as well. So if you can go to the first slide, Nicole, the next slide. That would be great. And so I'm going to start by asking, what was the most impactful event that you ever attended that built your commitment to inclusion and diversity in your organization, or maybe built your interest? And that having said, I'd like to start with a poll. And Nicole, I think you're our poll master. So I guess we should head over to Menti. And let's see. Interested to know what topics might work best in your organization. Yeah, so that would be cool if people could help us out by responding about what topics work best in your organization. Probably remembering the link for Menti to go back over to it, hopefully. People have it there. Yay! Looks like people like trying out some exercises. Yeah, that's fun. We've definitely done that, and that works great. Having some guest speakers is always a really good option. Looks like that's something that people have tried. Any other input from people in terms of like what topics you think might work in your organization? Yeah, personal experience speakers and panels. Those are super impactful, right? Well, thanks for your input. Let's go back to our slide 15. Thanks, Nicole. And so if we can flip to the next slide, I think what we found is that the most impactful events for us have been the ones that are building empathy. And this is something that we talk about in a lot of different forums. So, when we talk about the toolkit and building in our organization at Netflix, what has really worked is events that help build empathy in terms of being impactful. And when I think about the question myself, I can think about hearing about some events that have been impactful to other people. And I know that you've talked about some events that have been impactful. Mm-hmm. What's the most impactful event that you ever had that helped build your commitment?
Yeah, one of the most impactful events that I attended was actually our very first event. And we watched Hannah Gadsby's Nanette. And I don't know how many people have seen that. I do highly recommend it. As it was, I hadn't watched it before we were having the day that we were having our event. It's TVMA. And I had a young son at the time, and just no time to really watch TV without him nearby. So, but I had a spare hour at work on the day of the event over lunch, and so I thought, no problem. I just booked myself a room at work and watched this show. And I think the event was later in the day, and I had another meeting in between, and I just had no idea what I was about to experience. The show is billed as a comedy, and that's what I expected. And much of it is. Hannah Gadsby is an Australian comedian, and she's got just a very wry and kind of skewed take on a lot of things that's often hilarious. But she also speaks about homophobic and sexual violence and shares several examples from her own life, mostly toward the end. And so by the end, well, I was sobbing in this conference room at work, and I had no idea how I was going to go to this other meeting and then show up for the event after that. But I was leading the group, and it was our first event, and so I thought I have to do this. And, we had a great discussion. And I just thought, wow, I mean, if we can have that kind of environment where we can talk about something like this at work with other people from work, and really listen and make space for other people's experiences, we really have something here.
Wow, thanks a lot for sharing that, Anne. I can tell that was a really impactful event for you. And by the way, I have seen that also, and I totally recommend it as well. And for those of you who don't know Anne, I have to give her a great shout out. She's our fearless leader of this group and our tireless organizer. So amazing kudos to you, Anne. And Nicole, how about you? What was an event that was, most impactful to you, would you say?
Yeah, thanks for asking. One that definitely comes to mind really more of a chance for me to be vulnerable with others and relate to other people. It was right after I came back from maternity leave, after having twins, and we had a watch club going over gender gap. And one of the things that the piece, the mini documentary, talked about was how there's a per child wage gap, and how I very much struggle with identifying as a mother, wanting to share how cute my little kids are, but then also feeling like I need to hold that back and shield that, not wanting that to impact my performance and my identity at work too. And it was really impactful for me because a lot of people heard me, identified with me. I got to hear from a lot of parents and non-parents alike, share their experiences and how those types of issues impact them as well. So that was a really impactful event for me.
Wow, that's awesome. Thanks a lot for sharing. And I also want to give a shout out to Nicole. For those of you that don't know her, Nicole is an awesome security community member and also a great collaborator. So thanks a lot, Nicole. And thanks for organizing this whole session, both of you as well. So yeah, when we think about organizing events, I wish I could ask all of you out there what events that you've attended that are impactful. But for myself, I'd just like to share an event that was impactful, which was something I didn't expect, but it was a panel about differently abled people that was organized by Netflix. And there were like several panel members, and one was a young woman who spoke about her experience having hearing difficulty. And I remember listening to her and just being astonished and thinking like, oh my gosh, I would never have expected that this young woman has hearing problems. She had no like hearing aid or anything, obvious about her. And then I thought about myself. I was like, what is it that I think people who have hearing problems look like? Like, what is it about me that has some expectation about that? And she talked about how in meetings, in conference rooms, she often had a real difficulty hearing people, especially when there were carpets or the room was slightly big or people were turned away from her. And she said that one of the hardest aspects of her experience was that she got feedback from others that she often appeared aloof, disconnected, or uninterested in meetings. And she said that that totally wasn't the case, but that when she had trouble hearing all the words or following the discussion, that she would sometimes appear disconnected. And I thought, wow, when I'm in a meeting with someone who appears aloof, uninterested, or disconnected, I would never think, wow, maybe they have hearing difficulty, but now I will. And I just remember thinking how much I learned that day and how much I learned about myself. And, as Anne was saying, like learning and growing and thinking like, I have a lot of preconceived notions and expectations about what people with hearing difficulties must look like, and they're totally wrong. So that was an example of a super impactful event to me. So now, Nicole, if we can go to the next slide. I thought that I would just cover some different types of events that can create this kind of impact in your community. And so those include obviously speakers, and these could be people who speak on a variety of topics, but they just come as an individual and speak on any type of topic that's related to their expertise, their experiences, maybe a discipline or some other type of thing. So that definitely can be a great type. And a panel, that's sort of a format. Guest speakers, where we have an event and then maybe invite different guests or guest speakers as part of that to talk about areas of their expertise. Another really popular event type are watch parties. And we've had long form watch parties, short form watch parties, movie clubs. This is an event type that lends itself to a lot of variety. And some of you guys may have had it as well. And so we've found that in terms of format, the best watch parties include a video that is no more than 3, sometimes as little as 3.5, and sometimes no more than like 19 minutes in terms of having people watch. And then you go to the event and you actually watch that together. And one of the great benefits of this event is it feels like a really low lift to people who are attending, and they know it. They don't have to do any homework. They don't have to do any pre-work. They don't have to come worried about whether they're prepared and they're going to embarrass themselves because they're going to show up unprepared. We all go through it together and we all feel that impact together. And we've had these on a variety of topics and media that we'll see a little bit later. We've had book clubs and read and discuss clubs, and these can be very effective too, especially if you get a group over time. Although I will say that what we found about book clubs is breaking up a book obviously into chapters rather than expecting people to show up having read the whole book at least. But even with that, it can sometimes feel like homework, or people have great intentions to read the book or the chapter in advance. I know I've totally done this. And then, you know, the day and the event comes and you've just been overwhelmed with work and personal commitments and haven't been able to do it. So book clubs can be great, but they also can have that drawback because then it can discourage attendance. So one thing that we found is that if we do have a book club or a reading club, that you make it abundantly clear in the meeting invitation, the notices, that even if people haven't read the book or the event, they're totally welcome to come and will benefit from the discussion if you want to boost attendance. We've had professionals come and speak who are professionals in different space to talk to us about topics like inclusive language, the importance of diversity, other type of groups. And these are groups that are guided by professional guidance. And these have been super successful as well. And then a sixth type of event we've had are kind of what we call like just the facts, ma'am, kind of factual presentations that talk about like, here's the state of the state in various areas of the world or various aspects of our experience to sort of show, you know, here's where some disparities lie. Here's where some differences in attitudes lie. And then we can have a discussion about that. So those are 6 totally different type of events, all of which can create great impact. And now, Nicole, if you can pop ahead to the next slide, here's a 7th type of event, just to give you an idea. And to think about it, we start by thinking about the fact that we're all a bit biased. I mean, I know that I am, and acknowledging it is really a first step. And Anne, thank you so much for sharing your story about, you know, your recent experience. And, you know, we've all done that day in and day out. And the absolute worst is for someone to feed you back something and you're actually literally not aware that you did it. And then to find that, yep, you definitely did that. And believe me, I've been there too. So the first step is acknowledging and realizing, wow, like, you know, we all have our different biases and we also experience bias as well. And the second step then is taking action to overcome it. So here's another type of event, which is taking a quiz. This one is from Project Implicit, which is a nonprofit started by researchers at Harvard, the University of Washington, and U of Virginia. So I included a link to this, and this created a great event. And again, in order to minimize the lift to people, we're super busy. We're at work. People have a lot of things to do. If you can go to an event and do the activity together, you tend to boost attendance because people feel like, wow, you know, I don't have to have done something in advance. This one, we took this quiz together from Project Implicit, and then we in breakout rooms, and then we came back out and went into different breakout rooms and discussed our experiences, and then all came together at the end and had someone talk about what we may have learned. So that's another idea that I hope would be helpful to you. And let's go to the next slide. And in this slide, we just talk about a few practical tips that for us for successful events. And when we say successful, we mean impactful as well as with good attendance, good feedback, and good participation. And so what we found really works well is starting with topic selection, which seems really easy. But then when you volunteer to do that next event and you're like digging around for that topic, then you suddenly realize, wow, like, what is my topic actually? And it's a lot harder than it thinks. It's kind of like starting your novel and you sit down to write that first sentence and like your brain goes dry. So what we found is picking a topic or content that really resonates with you and asking yourself, like, what's been impactful to me lately? That's a great starting place. A next suggestion we found is recruiting a co-host or two. We all have great intentions. We want to write that novel ourselves and hold that event. But honestly, it really helps to have a co-host pal helping you along the way. And here's a shout out to Nicole, who I asked to be my co-host for a recent event that we did. And it was so great to have her as my co-host. I really appreciated it. And Anne, also a perennial co-host and introducer that, you know, when you have a couple of co-hosts, some of the things you can do is put a meeting on your calendar in a week where you're going to get together and talk about the agenda and the slides. And I find that forces me and helps me to like really prepare. Whereas if I'm alone, I tend to leave that stuff for the last minute. So it kind of helps move you along. It also really helps to have that person to bounce stuff off of beforehand, throw together a bunch of ideas and slides and topics, and that person can act as natural feedback loop and let you know. And also finding resources. So those are some real reasons that co-hosting is great. I know our time is coming up soon, so I'm just going to zoom through the rest of these. Logistics, that we want to make sure the event is inclusive with respect to timing. And we found that 30 to 40 minutes is a perfect time. That hour-long slots, again, people have good intentions. They sign up, but then a lot of times are unable to attend at the last minute. And also recommending looking for resources, checking for videos and other resources. Okay, so then on to the next slide. And I think this is last one. That here's some event and topic ideas that have worked really well with us. In terms of personal experience, we've done a lot of personal experience, but here are two that are less frequently done. We did an event on neurodiversity that ended up working really well. And another one just on anxiety, which is often viewed as a form of neurodiversity alone. It was a great event. And it was also a watch club where we had a video. I see a lot of people like exercises, so I included allyship cards and social exercises. Here's some specific watch clubs we've done lately. One on Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie on the danger of a single story. This was a fantastic 19-minute video watch club. We did a short form watch club with Pearl and a book and video club. We had book clubs, professional discussions. So that's it. I'm going to wrap up. I see our time is here. And in the next slide, we provided some resources. Any questions from the audience before our time passes? I think that could be it. So thanks so much. And thanks, Nicole and Anne. It's been wonderful speaking today.
Thank you so much. So some resources linked out here in the Menti. So hopefully you can copy them if they're of interest to you. I know we're technically out of time. I won't speak for my wonderful co-hosts, but I have a few extra minutes. I'm not sure if our session will like abruptly end or anything technology wise, but I have a few extra minutes. If folks do have questions that they'd like to stay around, I'm happy to chat.
Yep, I have time. I'm happy to stay around and chat.
I have time as well. And I think we also have Slack. So if there's something we're not able to get to, please feel free to approach any of us on Slack, and we're happy to talk.
Yes, absolutely. 100%. Thank you, Anne. Great. Thank you all so much for attending. Really appreciate it.
Have a great rest of your day.
Yes, thank you.